All right, so in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. This is our third lecture in Patristics and Patrology, and we're continuing our study of the Church Fathers. The first week, if you remember, was the basic introduction, right? The overview, and even the first reading was the same thing. It was a very good introduction and overview. The second week, we talked about the Apostolic Fathers, that generation after the disciples and the apostles, the disciples of the disciples, right? And what I like about this study, what I like about this particular block of classes, is that what we're taking in class generally matches what you're reading in the book. So like sometimes it's like different things where we try to cover a topic, so we cover what we can in class, and you read something different, and that way you get like the whole picture, you know. But in this case, like, what I'm saying in class, hopefully, is directly reinforced by what you're reading at home, and so hopefully this helps to make it stick in our minds, and we actually like remember stuff, right? So today we'll start with this verse. Justin, can you read this verse for us?
But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear.
Okay. And also read, this is the same exact verse, just a different translation. Please read.
But in your hearts set Christ apart as holy acknowledging Him, giving Him first place in your lives as Lord. Always be ready to give a logical defense to anyone who asks you to account for the hope and confident assurance elected by faith that is within.
It's cut off at the bottom, but what I want to say here is this verse from 1 Peter 3:15. This idea of apologist, this idea of giving a response, of giving a reason. Okay, the Greek word here, this comes from the word logos, you know, so the L-O-G. So it's almost like giving the reason, giving the rationale, giving the logic, and so when we use the word apologize, we think of like I did wrong, and then like let me give the reason and say sorry, you know. But when we say this word apologist or apology, talking about theology, it's someone giving a defense of the faith, you know. The thing is, this verse has three parts to it. Okay, let's take these three parts separately. The first one, sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. In your hearts, set Christ apart as holy, acknowledging Him, giving Him first place in your life. What is that first part telling me to do? Sanctify the Lord in my heart means what?
To make Christ your first priority.
Make Him my priority, make Him my life, make Him my, I'm dedicated to Him. Set myself apart for Him, holy and purely. Okay? That's the first part of the message, right? That you may always be ready to give a defense. Okay? Always be ready to give a logical defense. What does this mean? I have to know how to speak. I have to know how to answer. I have to have certain points in my head, right? For the account, for a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. You know, for the hope and confident assurance that is within you. Okay. As Christians, if I really have God as the center and the focus of my life, then guess what will happen naturally? I will naturally have joy. I will naturally have peace. And I will naturally have hope. Does that mean everything in your life is going to be perfect? Does that mean you're never going to have a problem? Does that mean you're never going to go through heartache and heartbreak? No, you're still going to go through bad things happen. Tribulations happen. You know, unfortunately, people die. People pass away, right? And there's a mourning process. Unfortunately, hearts get broken, and there's sadness, and they're like bad things happen. And it's not saying that your life is always going to be perfect. But if I have God as my center, if I have God as my rock, then even when I go through the difficult times in my life, there's a certain peace and there's a certain inner joy. Or even like though I go through times of heartbreak and then times of anger or resentment and I get to acceptance, like I go through difficult times, there is that peace and joy and hope because I trust in God. Does that make sense? You know what our problem is? People aren't asking us. People aren't asking us because the joy is not in us. People aren't even asking us because the hope is not in us. Christians themselves are the ones who are like walking around and depressed. The worst thing you can say is that the Christian person has no hope. The Christian person has no joy. You know? So first and foremost, have Christ as my center and my rock. That way I can have that joy and that peace and that hope. And then when people see that in me and they ask me, then I'll be ready to give them an answer. You see how this one verse has all of that in it? So this is the apologists, the defenders of the faith. All right, talk a little about my high school years. My senior year in high school, my English teacher's name was Mr. Chapla. During Mr. Chapla's time, we were reading 17th, 18th, 19th century literature. And he would talk about the Romantic writers, people like Voltaire, people like Rousseau. Did you ever hear of these names?
Yeah.
You study them in history or in English?
English.
In English, okay. And so, what does it mean, the Romantic writers? It's not like romance as in like Valentine's Day, flowers and chocolates, but what does romantic mean? It's more of like, say it again?
Descriptive.
And so, my teacher, I remember Mr. Chappell, after reading these things, he would ask us, and he would say, how many of you can go out into nature and see God's creation and feel connected to God, right? And then so many people would like raise their hands. So the funny thing is I was in a Catholic school. It was a small Catholic school, and in the Catholic school, the teacher's asking all the kids, how many of you feel God in nature? And they all raise their hand. Okay? And he says, how about when you go to church? How many of you can go to church and pray and you feel God's presence? Right? Guess who raises their hand? And guess who's the only one who raises their hand? So he asks who feels God's presence and who can connect to God in a real way when they're in church. He's asking this question in the Catholic school, and the one kid that raises his hand is the one kid in the class who's not Catholic. You know, it's pretty... And then so he asked me why. And you know what my response was? I don't know. I had no idea. And you know what? I was 17, whatever. I was 17, like I was a senior in high school. I was just like, I just do, and I knew it growing up, but he asked me to articulate why, and I had no idea how to. Were you ever in a situation where someone asked you a question and you didn't know how to respond? Use that as fuel. Were you ever in for the deacons in the room, was there ever a time when you were serving in the altar and you went to say a response and you completely messed up? Okay? Use these things as fuel. Use these things as energy. Like when I completely mess up, take that as, you know what? I'm going to study and I'm going to learn and I'm going to know how to do these things the right way. Or if someone asks you a question and you don't know, and you're really upset that you don't know, and you're really upset that you don't know how to answer, use that as fuel to drive you to do your servant's prep homework. Does that make sense? So if you ever feel like to really learn, to really grow, should you always talk? Should you always answer?
No.
No, why not?
If you don't know, you don't want to say something wrong.
That's one thing. What else?
The person who's asking you about it, he might want an answer to trick you into it.
Good. So there's two things. Number one, maybe that person is very well trained. Like I remember one time I had a Jehovah's Witness at my house, and she was saying something to me about like Jesus is not God. And so I said to her, I was like, well, how about when Jesus says I and the Father are one? You know what her response was? She goes, well, you're married. Are you and your wife one? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, you and your wife are one, but you're still two different people. The same thing with Jesus and God. Like they're not one. They're two. And I just looked at her and I smiled. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, you're really trained well. Like it was like no matter what I say, like she studied and was trained, and it's like whatever argument I make, she already knows what counter argument she has that she's gonna say, you know? Sometimes people don't even want to know. Sometimes people just want to argue, okay? Like if someone just wants to argue and they're not even interested in listening, then what is answering gonna do? Waste your time. So don't waste your time. And if you argue with a fool, guess what you become?
A fool.
So it even takes wisdom and prayer and discernment to know even when I should speak and when I shouldn't speak. Okay? So here. But you know what? I appreciate Mr. Chapler so much because I had so many questions that I didn't know the answer to. And so when I entered college, number one, I knew I wanted to repent and reconnect to God and come back to church, like in a deeper way. And number two, I wanted to grow and I wanted to learn and I wanted to be. So I entered college with this fervor and with these questions so it actually was a big part of my formation and shaping. And I remember he would say, he's like, how come the Old Testament says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? And how come the New Testament says turn the other cheek? Why is God teaching revenge in the Old Testament, and then he's teaching mercy in the New Testament? And I was like, oh wow. And my gut feeling was there probably is a reason, there has to be an answer, but I had no idea. And it wasn't until I was in college and I was like, oh, and then it's funny because I got a lot of growth and I got a lot of answers. And at times I was like, man, I wish I could go back and like visit and speak with them and answer, but I never did. But my point is he made all these questions that made me want to answer, but I had no idea what the answer was, you know. And but I wanted to learn. I wanted to know. So apologetics is defending the faith versus accusations or attacks. Sometimes it's not people attacking; it's really questioning, and apologetics is giving an answer. But like I said, sometimes people attack because they want to disprove that they don't have enough courage to rebel. So I make accusations to make my rebellion seen justified. But I'll tell you, so many people who were attackers of Christianity themselves, because they were honest, they themselves came to be believers. You know? And we have several examples of that. Mark?
Can you actually explain the eye and tooth for the tooth thing?
Can I explain it now? Sure. Since I brought up a question, it's not good to leave a question hanging, right? Either of you guys have a response? Anybody know? So the Old Testament says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. God was mean. The New Testament says turn the other cheek. God is loving. Why did God change his mind? Is God inconsistent? Okay, what's the answer, Mark? Go ahead. Come on, don't be shy.
Mark was talking about it, right? When we said it, yeah.
Okay, so the thing is, but let me put it this way. Say we were in the Old Testament times, right? People were so hardened of heart, right? That say Peter was a farmer, okay? So Peter was a farmer, and he has his farm, right? And then on his farm he has chickens, okay? And then me, being the bad evil man that I am, I go to Peter's farm, and I kill his chicken, okay? How does he feel?
Sad.
Angry, upset,
no,
sad,
kill
right? So sad over the chicken, but angry at me, right? And then so for revenge, what does he do?
Kill your
He comes to my house and he kills my mother. Okay? So I killed his chicken. He's so angry and so hardened of heart that he came to my house and he killed my mother. What is God teaching then in the Torah? God is saying, if someone takes a tooth, only take a tooth. If someone takes an eye, only take an eye. If someone kills a chicken, only kill a chicken. Okay? God is teaching what? Justice. Okay? Humanity is kind of like a child that developed and grew. Like if my 4-year-old, how I treat my 4-year-old is going to be different than how I treat my 10-year-old. And Natalia, how old are you?
17.
It's going to be different than how I treat my 17-year-old. Like, and especially now, like My dad, how he treats his son who's 40 and a priest. It's different than when I was the kid online in ShopRite and wanted to steal the gum and put it in my pocket. You know, it's you grow and you grow and you mature, right? And God is the same way with us. So what God was teaching then was, let me raise you up a level. Let me raise you up a level. Let me raise you up a level. Now, let me teach you justice. Let me teach you fairness. Let me teach you an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life, a chicken for a chicken, right? Now that you understand justice, and now that you're growing and you're getting more mature, now since you understand what's fair, let me raise you up, and now let me teach you love. If you guys read the Sermon on the Mount, you know Matthew chapter, chapters 5, 6, 7, the chapters of the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, he's saying, I did not come to abolish, to destroy. I came to fulfill, to perfect, right? And everything that you heard before was the basis. Now I'm going to raise you up a level. You heard before, don't kill. Now I'm telling you, don't even say anything negative. You heard before, don't commit adultery. Now I'm telling you, don't even have the thought. Don't even look. You heard before, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now I'm telling you, if someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. You see how it's like, before you got the basics, now let me lift you up and bring you to the fruition and to the completion. You know, Mark, anything to add? The steps, the stages? I don't remember them.
Exactly. The only thing I would add is just that he also gives us the tools now, with the Holy Spirit, and to be able to, get to that higher level and meet the, he raises the bar. He gives us the tools to be able to meet that expectation.
Yeah. So he gives us the expectation, he gives us the standard, and he gives us what we need to be able to get there. Being renewed, being filled with the Holy Spirit. Does that answer it, Mark? Does that make sense? So it's like, and Jesus himself says it. Like, I didn't come to destroy, I came to perfect, to fulfill. And you heard this, now I'm telling you that. You heard this, now I'm telling you that. You heard this, now. It's everything before was basic, and now I'm raising you up to a level of love and of sacrifice. So that's actually a really good example. Someone reading the Bible, and they say, this doesn't make sense. Someone reading the Bible and says, this contradicts. Someone else who's studied and more mature and knows can say, no. And then you explain it, and then it's like, oh, not only does it not contradict, it's so beautiful. It's so like you get the fullness of the beauty of the picture of what Christ did. Make sense? So that's apologetics. Now, I'm not going to answer every single question. Like, the goal of this next hour, it's not going to be like, let me teach you guys every question and every answer and every response. This is going to tell you, my main point is, you need to know the culture around you, and you need to understand where people are at, right? The first thing, for a good doctor to be able to heal you, what's the first thing he needs to do? Study medicine. Say, for example, the doctor studied medicine, okay, graduated at the top of his class, and now I'm sitting in his office and I'm sick. For him to heal me, what's the first thing he needs to do?
Know your history.
Know my history and?
Examine.
Examine to? What's the word? There's a certain word.
Diagnose.
Yes. Say it louder.
Diagnose.
Diagnose. What does that mean?
Find what's wrong.
So, there's a principle that seek first to understand before wanting to be understood. Seek first to understand before wanting to be understood. Sometimes someone's like saying something, and you're already in your head. You're like, say for example, Noah has issues with me, and he comes up to me and he's like, boom, and he's confrontational, and he starts saying point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5. Guess what's in my head? I'm not listening to nothing he's saying, because what's in my mind? Oh, how I'm gonna respond. So sometimes where the person is coming from, I'm not even getting what they're saying because I'm already thinking about what I want to say. Stop. First, understand and see where they're coming from. Okay? And all these fathers of the church, they understood what the people that were attacking them were coming from. They were able to meet people where they were at, and then from there, answer and grow and bring them to the truth. You see? So, the first thing that we're going to need to do is be sensitive and seek to understand and seek to know. From there, we ourselves find the answers and then be prepared to answer. That's like the common theme. The apologists were the defenders of Christianity. All the previous writings were for guidance and edification. It was bishops writing to their churches, right? But now, the writings of the Greek apologists are addressed to the outside world, and they enter the domain of culture and science. What were they up against? Rumors about Christians were rampant among the general population. The state regarded the profession of Christianity as a capital crime against the official cult and the majesty of the emperor. The enlightened judgment of scholars and the weight of opinion among moral cultivated classes condemned the new religion as an ever-increasing threat to Rome's worldwide dominion. All right, what kind of rumors could they say about Christians? Crazy, stupid things. Like they would hear about the Eucharist, and Christians would say, that we're partaking of the body of Christ. So the people that wanted to attack are like, oh, they're taking a baby and killing it and cannibalism. They're eating like that. They would think like we're eating an actual baby. And they would make like these crazy accusations, or all kinds of crazy negative things. And so the Christians had to respond, okay? They actually called Christians atheists. Why? Because if, say for example, you were living in Rome, okay? If you were living in Rome, everyone worshipped the Roman gods, right? And then if you loved Rome, you would sacrifice to the Roman gods so that they would protect Rome, okay? So if someone didn't sacrifice to the Roman god, then you don't believe in God. And if you don't believe in God, then what? You're an atheist, right? Not only are you an atheist, but you're unpatriotic and you don't care about your country. Because if you really cared about your country, you would worship the God of your country so that your country can be blessed. So it's like, that's how they looked at the Christians as being atheists, they don't believe in their gods, and as being unpatriotic. So these are examples of opponents in the 2nd century Christianity. There was a guy named Lucian of Samosata in 170 AD. He derided the faithful for their brotherly love and their contempt of death. He would even say like, oh, Christians love death so much, you know what, go kill yourselves. Like it was just, how the media makes fun of like leadership now, or like if you see like satire, like Saturday Night Live, or you see like, if you see all these things that just make fun and completely disrespect the president, or if you see how people make fun, like how is Christianity generally portrayed in the general media? Now.
Respect.
Do you think?
Actually, not really.
Like how is a Christian generally portrayed in the media?
Like they're the weird ones.
Weird?
Yeah, they're against societal norms.
So like, not just making fun of, but a completely disrespectful, mocking, like satirically, like making fun of it. This is nothing new. This was happening since the 100s and 200s and 300s, So Christians have to respond to this kind of thing. There was a guy named Fronto of Serta. He wrote an oration, and he was the teacher of Marcus Aurelius. There was a guy named Celsus. He was followed the teachings of Plato. He wrote something called the True Discourse, and the reason we have this is because when these people would making fun of Christianity or attacking Christianity, or our fathers would quote them and then respond, would quote them and then respond, would quote them and then respond. So how do I know about Celsus's writings? Because Origen has a book called Against Celsus. And guess what Origen did? Quoted him and responded, and quoted him and responded, and quoted him and responded. So the reason, it's the same thing with, how do I know what Arius' teaching was? So Arius has a teaching called, it was called the Thalia, and it was basically all his teaching written in poems. It doesn't exist anywhere except where? In Athanasius' writings. And it's because the fathers of the church were honest, where they quoted them and then responded, quoted them and then responded, quoted them and then responded. So I'm telling you, you know how I'm saying, be sensitive and know where the other people are coming from? Seek to understand. They knew where people were coming from so well, and they knew how to respond, and they responded. Yeah. So the apologists had three main objectives. They answered the charge that the church was a threat to the state. They pointed to the earnest, strict, chaste, and honorable lives of Christians. They insisted that the faith was a dominant force for the maintenance and welfare of the world, not only the empire and the state, but also all of civilization. So if people were saying, because you're not worshiping the gods, Christians are unpatriotic, they're bad for the country, because you're not worshiping the gods, we're going to be cursed and other people are going to attack us and hurt us. The response was, no, Christians are actually good for the country. Christians are peaceful people, loving people. Look at what they do, their conduct and so on. That's number one. Number two, they exposed the absurdities and immoralities of the pagans and their myths. So they demonstrated that Christianity alone has the correct understanding of God and the universe. And number three, they not only rebuked philosophy, but they showed philosophy depended on human reason. And therefore, it never led to absolute truth. It had fragments of truth, but mingled with human error. So Christianity possesses absolute truth because Christ himself is the Logos. Christ himself is the truth. Since the Logos, the divine reason itself, was incarnate upon the earth, and so Christianity is the divine philosophy. The word philosophy, philo, like love, like Philadelphia. Philo is like love. Sophia is wisdom. So the philosopher is the lover of wisdom. And they would argue that Christianity is the true philosophy. And the Christians are the true ones that love wisdom. Yeah. Okay, so they're called the Greek apologists because they wrote in Greek. So these are the guys who wrote. These are the people from that time whose writings we have. So the one guy, his name was Quadratus, Aristides of Athens, Aristo of Pella, Justin Martyr, Tatian, Tatiana the Syrian, Miltiades, Apollinaris, Athenagoras, Theophilus, Melito of Sardis, and then a writing called the Epistle to Diognetus. This is actually the one a few Sundays ago I read from it in church, and people were like, "Wow, what was that letter you read from?" You know, but it was a defense of Christianity, saying the characters of Christians and how they were, and so on. But a lot of people that day texted me and said, "Oh, you know, where'd you get that from?" And I texted them the link to this letter online, and then they read it and they're like, "Wow, this was so good." So it's even people now still read this stuff, and like the funny thing is, one of the dads was like, "What was that thing you read?" And I texted him and he read it, and he's like, "This is exactly what our youth need today." He's like, our kids need to learn this and read this and study this to understand and know like why they're different. And so it's kind of funny because I'm like, it's from like, you know, Hawaii. It's from like centuries ago and it's written in Greek, but this dad read it and he's like, "Yeah, like this is the good stuff." All right, so let's jump right into it here. Quadratus. Quadratus is the oldest apologist of Christianity. Eusebius writes this of him. He said, when Trajan had reigned for 19.5 years, Aelius Hadrian succeeded to the sovereignty, and to him Quadratus addressed a treatise. So this is a Christian who's writing a letter to the emperor, to the king, composing an apology, a defense for our religion, because some wicked men were trying to trouble the Christians. It is still extant among many of the brethren, and we have a copy of it ourselves. So this is Eusebius saying this when he wrote in like the 300s. From it can be seen the clear proof of his intellect and his apostolic orthodoxy. He shows his early date by what he says, following in his own words. But the works, Yeah, so this is now, so from here to here is Eusebius talking about Quadratus, okay? But now, starting from here, he's actually quoting Quadratus. So this is Quadratus' own words. He says, "But the works of our Savior were always present for they were true. Those that were healed and those that rose from the dead that were seen, not only when they were healed and when they were raised, but constantly present. And not only while the Savior was living, but even after he had gone, they were alive for a long time, and some of them survived even down to our own time. So Quadratus, writing a defense of Christianity, is saying there's people that Jesus healed, and there's people that Jesus rose, and they're still around till now. It's like he's giving his proof. I remember, again, I went to a Catholic school, as I said to you guys, and so my sophomore year, Spanish 2, the nun's name who taught Spanish was Hermana Margarita. Hermana Margarita. I still remember Hermana. Hermana means sister. And so I remember she was saying something, and I said, oh, my parents are from, because you know how they talk about Lourdes and Medjugorje and all the different like Marian apparitions? And so she was talking about a Marian apparition, and then I mentioned that I'm from Egypt or something. And then she's like, oh, Egypt. She's like, St. Mary like appeared there. And I'm like, yeah, St. Mary appeared in Zaytun. And she goes, yeah. And I was like, my mom saw her. And she just looked at me and like, her mouth dropped. She's like, what? I was like, yeah, my mom saw her. I was like, my mom and my grandmother saw St. Mary when she appeared in Zaytun. And she was just like, because you know how you read about Lourdes and you read about Medjugorje and you can read and hear about these things and you know they're real. But when you meet someone whose mom and grandmother saw St. Mary, for her this was like, because I'm sure teaching and being a nun and like you teach people and you kind of get discouraged and you think, is there any faith? And then you see this response and you're just like, she was so happy. You know, I'm like, yeah, St. Mary appeared in Zaytun and my mom and my grandmother like saw her. It's like an eyewitness saying this really happened, and the person it happened to told me about it. And Quadratus was early enough that he's saying, yo, the people Jesus raised, the people Jesus healed, they're still walking around and they're telling us what happened. So it's witness of you know how people like attack and say, oh, how do you know this stuff is true? How do you know whatever? Like we have witnesses, we have textual evidence, and in this case, it's Eusebius in the 300s quoting Quadratus from the much earlier time. So this is the only existent fragment of his writing that we have, that small piece that's quoted by Eusebius. He most likely presented his apology to the Emperor Hadrian during his stay in Asia Minor, somewhere around 125 AD. Sometimes he's considered an apostolic father. So sometimes they'll mention Quadratus with Ignatius and Polycarp and the Didache and all that earlier stuff. He should not be confused with another Quadratus who was a bishop. So that's the first guy. Second guy we'll talk about, his name is Aristides of Athens. Eusebius says of him, Aristides also, a man of faith and devoted to our religion, has, like Quadratus, left an apology of the faith addressed to Hadrian. His writing, too, has been preserved by many. He was a philosopher from Athens. Manuscripts of his writing, his work was long considered lost, but in 1878, a 10th century Armenian manuscript was published, titled To the Emperor Adrian Caesar from the Athenian philosopher Aristides. In 1889, a complete Syriac translation was found in the St. Catherine Monastery in Mount Sinai. He came to a knowledge of a creator and a preserver of the universe through his meditation on the world and the harmony that exists therein. So just by looking at the world and the order that's in the world, he said, you know what, there must be a God. He divided human beings into 4 categories from his time, based on the religions. So you have Christians, you have Jews, you have the Greek, like the Hellenists, and then you have the people that just like, the native people that just like worship, he refers to them as like barbarians. So barbarians, he said, again this is Aristides writing, he's like, these are the people that worship the elements, heaven, earth, water, and fire, wind, sun, moon, and even man, and they're all created works of God. So the barbarians to him are the People that worship nature will worship creation. The Greeks, they have their gods, but who through the weakness and infamies attributed to them, prove themselves to not be gods. You have the Jewish people, we all know who they are, and he said, they can be respected because they have a purer conception of the divine nature, and also for the superior standards of morality. But according to him, they pay more attention to external things like circumcision, fasting, feast days, than really knowing God and worshiping God. He says Christians, they alone have the only true idea of God. And they, above all the nations of the world, have found the truth. For they acknowledge God, the creator and maker of all things, and the only begotten Son and the Holy Spirit. And besides him, they worship no other. Listen to the descriptions of the Christians that Patristics gives. He says, they have the commandments of the Lord Jesus Christ himself graven upon their hearts, and these they observe, looking for the resurrection of the dead and for the life in the world to come. They do not commit adultery, nor fornication, nor do they bear false witness, nor covet the things of others. They honor their father and mother, they love their neighbors, they give right judgment, and they never do to others what they would not wish to happen to themselves. They comfort such as wrong them, and they make friends of them. They are eager to do good to their enemies. They are meek and gentle. They refrain themselves from all unlawful intercourse and impurity. They despise not the widow, and oppress not the orphan. He that gives ungrudgingly to him, he that has gives ungrudgingly to him that has not. If they see a stranger, they take him in under the roof, and they rejoice over him as if it their own brother. For they call themselves brethren, not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. They are ready to lay down their own lives for the sake of Christ. They keep his commandments without swerving. They live righteous and holy lives as the Lord their God commanded them. And they give thanks unto him every hour for all food and drink and other blessings. Truly, then, this is the way of truth, which leads to those who travel therein, to the eternal kingdom promised by Christ in the life to come. Wow. I wish we could be the kind of Christians that were described in the first century. You know? It's a lesson for us. So it's not only about defending the faith, it's a lesson to us of what a Christian should be and how I myself should act, how being a real Christian with all these characteristics. Aristo of Pella, about 140 AD, he was the first Christian apologist to defend Christianity in a written tract against Judaism. So basically in the early church, if you're going to see who's going to attack Christians, it's going to come from two ways. One would be the pagan Hellenists, and the other one would be the Jewish. If you're going to defend Christianity to a pagan, what do you think you're going to use? What do you think you're going to use if you're going to defend Christianity to a Greek philosopher? Like logic philosophy. Like if someone themselves is all like logical and philosophical and whatever, they're going to speak to them. If somebody Jewish is attacking Christianity, how do you think you're going to respond?
Old Testament.
Exactly, using the Hebrew Scriptures, using the Old Testament. Okay? So he wrote a book called Discussion Between Jason and Patristics Concerning Christ. Unfortunately, this writing has been lost. So Jason is a Judeo-Christian, and Patristics here is an Alexandrian Jew. And Origen tells us that this apology was attacked by the pagan philosopher Celsus in his work, The True Discourse. It ends with the Jewish guy acknowledging Christ as the Son of God and asking for baptism. In interpreting the Bible, Aristo had an allegorical exegesis, meaning he interpreted the Bible spiritually on a higher level. Anytime we interpret the Bible, we have the physical, historical, literal level, we have the moral level, and we have the spiritual level. So here, the Alexandrian school was very allegorical. So example, crossing the Red Sea, it's not just about Israel crossing the Red Sea, but crossing the Red Sea itself is a form of baptism. And it's not about Pharaoh and his soldiers, but it represents like the devil and his armies being destroyed. Make sense? It's like they spiritualize things and get the spiritual meaning out of it at a higher level. Mark, what time is it? Okay. Justin the Martyr. He's the most important of the Greek apologists in the 2nd century. He was born in Flavia Neapolis in Palestine between 100 and 110 AD to pagan parents. So he was born to a pagan family. He tells us that he himself tried first the different philosophical schools, right? First he tried Stoicism, a particular school. Then the Peripatetic. Then the Pythagorean. You guys know the Pythagorean theorem? Not only did Pythagoras do geometry and math, like a squared plus b squared is c squared with the hypotenuse, it was an entire system of study and philosophy, of which mathematics was just one part. So Justin the Martyr tried all these different studies and whatever, and then none of them convinced or satisfied him. The Stoic failed because it gave him no information concerning God's being. The Peripatetic, he insisted that he pay up first. He's like, I'll teach you in my school, but you gotta pay first. So he's like, dude, you're way too worldly, you know? He's just like, forget that. The Pythagorean demanded of him that he must first study music and astronomy and geometry. And so he had no inclination to do so. Plato, the teachings of Plato appealed to him for a long time so he was a Platonist, until one time he was walking along the seashore and he met this man and speaking with this man, and this man convinced him that the philosophy of Plato could not satisfy the heart of a human. And he called his attention to the prophets who alone announced the truth. Justin describes his own conversion, saying, "A flame was kindled in my soul, and a love of the prophets, and of those men who are friends of Christ, possessed me. I found this philosophy," talking about Christianity, "I found this philosophy alone to be safe and profitable. Thus and for this reason, I became a philosopher, and I could wish that all men were of the same mind as myself, not to turn from the doctrines of the Savior." He had an honest search for truth and a humble prayer. Noah, can you read this for us? This is a quote from Justin Martyr.
When I discovered the wicked disguise which the evil spirits had thrown around the divine doctrines of the Christians to deter others from joining them, I laughed both at the authors of these falsehoods and their disguise, and at the popular opinion. And I confess that I both prayed and strove with all my might to be found a Christian.
So the demons themselves say all kinds of negative things about Christians to deter other people. It's like, you know how Juan Antonio says a lot? Like, what Muslims think about Christianity and what they're told about Christianity is completely different than what Christianity actually is. They have such a bad idea of us and what Christians are. And so half of the battle is revealing to them that no, your understanding of Christians and Christianity is actually not accurate. You know, and he realizes that the same thing at his time. The rest of his life, Justin devoted his entire life to the defense of the Christian faith. He not only defended Christianity, his works also edified the Christians themselves and evangelized many non-Christians. Clothed in the pallium, which was the garment worn by the philosophers, he would walk around traveling teaching. He was a philosopher, and he used the terminology of the philosophy, and he baptized it, he Christianized it. So he was able, the great thing about these guys, you know how people that are very scholarly and people that are all proud and professors and knowledgeable, and they'll look at as knowledge of God and religion is for the simple. It's for the people that need to make up these explanations because they can't deal with the reality. You know that like prideful attitude of like Christianity is for the stupid, you know? The same thing existed at that time. It's like, and the wonderful thing about the fathers of the church, like what's the highest degree you can get now? What's the highest studies you could do? Doctor. So whether it be a medical doctor or a PhD or a law degree or the fathers of the church, at their time, they reached the highest levels of study, whether it was rhetoric, whether it was law, whether it was language. They reached the highest levels of study of their time. And then they were able to connect with people on an intellectual level and reason with them to say, hey, Christianity is not just for the stupid. Christianity is not just for the simple. But here I am, a successful, learned person, and I can argue and convince you for why this is true. Does that make sense? So he took a lot of terminology of philosophy itself, and he baptized it, using it for the church. He founded a school at Rome, and Tatian, Tatian the Syrian, was one of his students, who himself later became a great apologist. And then he was martyred by being beheaded with 6 of his companions. That's why he's referred to as Justin the Martyr. We have 3 books complete from him, 2 apologies against the pagans, and then another one that's a dialogue with a Jewish person named Trypho. So in both cases, so one is an apology defense to the pagan world, the other one is an apology defense to the Jewish mind. His first apology is 68 chapters addressed to Antonius Pius. Later, he addresses the Senate. He asks the emperor to fairly hear the Christian case and not to be misled by the bias and the hatred in the mob. He criticizes the judicial system of government that falsely accuses and punishes Christians. If we don't worship idols, it doesn't mean that we're atheists. Christians are actually good supporters of the government. That's what his first apology said. The second one, the prefect of Rome had 3 Christians beheaded simply because they confessed to be Christians. So like an event happens, and then people write a letter to Congress, and so this is what happened. So people were martyred, and so he felt like he needed to write something to the leaders to defend what Christianity is about. He appeals directly to the Roman public opinion, replying to various criticisms. So one example is martyrdom and suicide. Here's the thing. There's a church law, there's actually a canon. Even if you read, remember how last week we talked about the apostolic fathers? Remember how I said there was one of the apostolic fathers, his name was Polycarp? And we said that Polycarp, we have a letter to Polycarp, right? That was one of Ignatius's letters. And then we have a letter from Polycarp that Polycarp wrote, right? And then we have a letter about Polycarp, about his martyrdom. And he ended up being killed. He ended up being, if I'm not mistaken, burned at the stake, right? And so in that letter, it says, and this is where this teaching is from, that no one should seek martyrdom. Martyrdom is a calling. You know how many people said, yeah, let's die for Christ? And then they went, and then when they were actually under pressure, they denied Christ? A lot of people denied. So martyrdom is not this heroic act that we should jump after and seek. Martyrdom is a calling from God. And so our teaching is that no one should seek martyrdom. But if you witness and you're called to martyrdom, then you witness faithfully and you are martyred for Christ. So it's not some heroic choice, but it's a calling from God. We're commanded to flee even from Christ's words himself. Justin Martyr answered the sarcastic comment of the emperor that Christians should commit suicide to reach God fast. He's like, oh, you guys like being martyred? You want to reach God so fast? You know what? Kill yourselves. And so he responds saying that we don't seek death and suffering. We seek life. But if martyrdom is my calling, if death is what comes to us, then we witness faithfully. He had another book, the third book, called The Dialogue with Trypho. It contains a 2-day discussion with a learned Jew named Trypho. He discusses the soul, the new covenant, circumcision, the Passover, the scapegoat, the prophecy of Malachi, about offering throughout the world the forgiveness of sins, the names of the Son of God, the 1,000-year reign. And so all of these things are mentioned by Justin Martyr, speaking about the Old Testament. So the analogy of the first and second Adam and the first and second Eve, and even now, even here, you remember the thing how I started class? Remember the question I said my teacher said? And he said, how come the Old Testament says eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, New Testament said? So even amongst us, I brought up one thing from the Old Testament and one thing from the New Testament. And you guys were like, wait, what's the answer? So it's good for us to know this stuff, to read this stuff, to see there, because the same questions that were back then is the same questions now. And if we read these kind of things, it shows us how Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism, how it's the continuation of Judaism. Paul made the analogy of the first and second Adam. Justin Martyr continues this analogy to the first Eve and the second Eve being Saint Mary, which I'm sure you've all heard lectures about this so many times. How does he approach the people he's addressing? His writings reveal an open and honest character, which tries to reach an understanding with the opponent. He doesn't judge them, but he judges the teaching and the devil that they follow. We first fight against ourselves, and if we succeed, we fight the devil. Through God's grace, we can overcome both. The doctrine of the Logos. Okay? Here's the thing. If you're a Christian, do you have to believe that the basic premise of every other religion is wrong?
No.
Like, say for example, you're Jewish, say you're Buddhist, say you're Hindu, say you're, I don't know, say we're all a bunch of different religions, right? Say you're a Christian. If I'm a Christian, say you're Protestant and you're Catholic and you're Eastern Orthodox. We have like every denomination of Christianity here, and we have all the world religions here. Okay? If I'm a Christian, do I have to believe that everything about everything that you guys believe is wrong? No. Okay? But if I'm an atheist, then what do I have to believe? That the premise of everything that you all believe is wrong, because I say there is no God, right? But as a Christian, I can say, you know what? When I'm speaking to the Jewish person, there is a certain amount of truth in Judaism. When I'm speaking to a Muslim person, there is a certain amount of truth in Islam. There is a God, right? When I'm speaking to a Jewish person, there is truth in Judaism, right? But where do I disagree with them? Sorry. Excuse me. Where do I disagree with them? Say I'm speaking to a Muslim person. Where is the point of contention? Say it again.
What God is.
Who God is. Is Jesus just a prophet, or is he God incarnate? Right? Is Muhammad a prophet of God or not? So my point is you can connect with people and you can see the points where they are true. But then where you disagree with them is where your Orthodox Christianity differs with them. Does that make sense? So within everybody, every human being is made in the image of God. And because every human being is made in the image of God, there is a seed of the Logos. There is a seed. Anywhere that you see beauty, that is God. Anywhere you see truth, anywhere you see logic, anywhere you see reason, that is Christ. And so his point was you can connect with people on the good that is within them, because that is the image of God within them, and then from there, bring them up to the fullness of Christianity. Make sense?
610.
Go ahead.
610.
Okay. But do you have any comments on this, Mark?
No.
Okay. So that's the doctrine of the seed of the Logos. Two truths can't contradict. So true philosophy and true religion can't contradict. True science and true theology can't contradict. Since they didn't know the entire Logos, Christ, they often contradicted themselves. Also, pagan philosophers, many of them might have read the Old Testament. Western thinkers consider human nature to be completely corrupt. Even this quote, I don't want to overgeneralize it. Okay. You guys know the story of Cornelius in the book of Acts? It's in Acts chapter 10, right? Cornelius is fasting and praying, right? But he doesn't know the fullness of Christ. And so the angel appears to Cornelius and tells him, your fasting and your prayer have been accepted before God. So this is a person who's not Christian and who's fasting and is praying, right? And then, does God recognize and see his heart and see what he's doing? Yes. So am I now teaching, what's that word called? when like everything is good and everything is what's that word? What's that called?
Utopia.
Moral relativism. Am I sorry? By saying that there's truth in everyone, am I now being moral relative and saying, oh, it's true for me, it's true for me, and it's true for you, and yeah, it's all true, and it's always to God? Is that what I'm saying? No. What I am saying is that God sees the truth, and God sees the hearts of people and can accept that. Meeting them there, God can then take them for them to see the full truth. You know? So even Cornelius, even though the angel tells him, your prayer and your fasting have been accepted and God sees him, he still had to go to Peter and what? Be baptized. He still had to receive Christ. He still needs to be reborn like from above. So we can see and respect the good in others, but at the same time, we still all need Christ. And at the same time, Christ himself is the fullness of the truth. And even for us as Christians, we need to grow in our own Christian faith and grow in Christ. Does that make sense? If we look at our world now, throughout the earth, 1/3 of the people have never heard about Christ. Only about 1/3 are Christian. So if there's a Chinese peasant farmer who never heard of Christ, then according to St. Paul's teaching in Romans 1 and 2, this person will be judged according to their conscience. Like God, those who don't have the law, if someone never had the opportunity, there's a difference between someone who had the opportunity and rejects Christ, and then someone who's never even heard the message of Christ. You know, so and God is the only one who can judge, because God is the one who knows people's hearts and what they've been through. But if you look at this chart, about 1/3 of the world population is Christian. So 33% Christian, 20% Muslim, 13-14% Hindu, non-religious 12-13%, and then here you have other. Believe it or not, in the entire world, guess how much of the people are Jewish? 0.2%. Not 2%, 0.2%. Isn't that crazy? Because when you see like the influence and I was shocked by that. But anyway, so 33% of the world is Christian. But even among the people who identify as Christian, how many of those numbers actually live the fullness of a Christian life? So we don't believe in the infallibility of any teaching. Actually, we talked about this when we talked about dogma, so we can skip that over now. The next guy we'll talk about, Tatian the Syrian. He's a church scholar, so he's not a saint, he's not a father of the church, but we consider him like a scholar. He was born a pagan, and he became a pagan philosopher. He was a student of Justin Martyr, and similar to his teacher, he was seeking truth in philosophy, and that led him to Christianity, which is the true philosophy. His evaluation of non-Christian teaching and culture was sharply different than that of his teacher. Justin attempts to find elements of the truth in Greek thinkers. Tatian teaches complete renunciation of all Greek philosophy on principle. So you know how like Justin Martyr was saying, like you can have two schools of thought. You can have one person that says, if I ask you about studying regular worldly topics, so one person would say, just focus on Christianity and study the Bible, and don't study worldly topics. Why do you need all this stuff? What's important is Christianity. Someone else would say, no, study and be well-rounded, and know the world, know all these other topics, and then use that as a help in your Christianity. You get what I mean? So Justin was all about philosophy. Tatian was the complete opposite polar. He was like the complete polar opposite. Tatian was saying he hated everything that belonged to Greek civilization, art, science, and language. In his mind, Christianity didn't go far enough in its rejection of contemporary education and culture. He returned to East about 172 AD. He became the founder of the abstinence, which belonged to the group of Christian Gnostics. So in his extreme, in his being very extreme, he said that wine is not allowed, not even in the Eucharist. There was actually these people when they had communion, they offered bread and water because they were so extreme against like wine that no, you can't have wine in the Eucharist. They were referred to as aquari. He rejected marriage, and he said even like so we don't reject marriage. Like we say any sexual activity outside of marriage is sinful, but within marriage, within the context of a husband and wife and in matrimony, it's holy, you know, and even produces children. He was so extreme. He's like, no, you can't drink at all, you can't get married at all. Then eat meat in any form. So you know how we don't say meat is evil. We just have times of fasting where we restrain ourselves, right? But with him, it's like, no, you can't eat meat at all. So it's complete. He went very far. His writings, what he did was he took the 4 Gospels and he wrote them as if they were one script. So he put everything in order. You know how like you watch a movie about Christ, it's like all the things that happen in order? That's what he had. It's cutting and pasting the Gospels to make it one story. For a long time, this book was actually used in the Syrian church. There were many translations of it, and it was very popular. He wrote a discourse to the Greeks. It's not apologetic, but it's a treatise in which he rejects and belittles the whole culture of the Greeks. The philosophy, the religion, the achievements of the Greeks. In his mind, all of it is stupid and foolish. There's no moderation in his discourse. He was extremely violent. He said anything good that the Greeks had, they stole from the barbarians. The writings have 4 parts to it. The first discusses Christian cosmology, the creational order of the universe. A Christian demonology, talking about astrology. Greek civilization in the light of Christian attitude towards life. And age and moral value of Christianity. He talked about God, the attributes of God, and the resurrection of the body. Miltiades. He was a rhetorician born in Asia Minor. He was a contemporary of Tatian. He probably was also a student of Justin. All his writings have been lost, but Tertullian and Hippolytus report that he defended against pagans and against heretics. He wrote an apology for Christian philosophy to earthly rulers, against the Greeks, against the Jews, and he wrote a book against Montanus. Another guy named Apollinarius, he was the bishop of Hierapolis. He wrote a treatise to Marcus Aurelius, 5 books against the Greeks, 2 books on the truth, 2 books against the Jews and against the Montanus. None of these books exist now. Yeah.
Sorry, I think it's Italian.
Question? Yeah.
So why do we consider
Tatian?
a church scholar and one of the fathers if he ended up being almost Gnostic?
He's not.
So he's
So
just
if
but he's a church scholar?
So here.
He's not a father.
Let me go back to exactly how I had it written. He's a church scholar.
Okay,
Not a saint and not a father.
Okay.
Because
So why do we even teach him?
Because he's
He
so
just
what am I
focused.
studying now? What is the point of what we're studying now? The fathers of the church, right? Within these writings, what we're studying right now is those who had defended the faith. Okay? And so I have a list of names of people who wrote stuff defending Christianity. This guy happened to be off. Like this guy, like at least we're being honest and saying he wrote this defense of Christianity, but his problem was in his defense of Christianity, he was really extreme, and he really said all the worldly knowledges. It's kind of like, you know how Islam, when they burned down the Library of Alexandria, why did they do that? Because their thinking was, if there's anything in there that's like worldly knowledge, it's against God, and so we don't want it. And if there's anything then that is godly, everything godly that we have and we need is in the Quran, so why do we need all this stuff anyway? So that when they it's that same kind of like extreme attitude of like, and so it's because of this extreme that we can recognize his writings and say that he wrote. And then one of the things that he wrote was taking the gospel and putting it in one book, and it was used in the Syrian church. So all we're doing is honestly quoting that he did this work and that exists, you know? But his extreme teachings we disagree with, and that's the reason he's not considered a saint or a father. Does that answer your question? So we are attesting to the fact, Natalia, we're attesting to the fact that he did write, but we're not endorsing what he wrote. Exactly. We're not endorsing. We're not agreeing. This guy, Miltiades, he was a rhetorician born in Asia Minor. Oh, we talked about him, right? Apollinaris of Hierapolis. He was born in Hierapolis. He wrote a treatise to Marcus Aurelius, 5 books against the Greeks. We said this. Athenagoras of Athens. He came to Christ by reading philosophy and then by studying the scripture, Old and New Testament. Around 180 AD, his pen has the light, but without the heat of Tatian. So he was able to kind of say the same thing that Tatian said, but in a much less harsh way. You know how someone could say something and it's like a smack in the face? So make believe like me and Mark give the same message, right? And I give it, but the way I deliver it just annoys all of you, so none of you listen to me. But then maybe he gives the same message, but the way he says it, you could all, even though we're saying the same thing, the way we're saying it is different, you know? So his judgment of culture and philosophy of the Greeks is much kinder than what Tatian's was. He's more rhetorical than Justin Martyr. He has an attractive Greek style with his rhetoric. We have 2 books from him, an apology for the Christians and on the resurrection of the dead. He taught that the 2 wings of faith are revelation and reason, and that they go together. Again, he is a sometimes you want to connect with people that you're preaching to, right? And so because he's connecting to thinkers, and he's connecting to people that are all about reasons, and what does he say? That faith has 2 wings, that there's 2 wings, and one wing is reason, and another wing is faith. Another wing is faith. You guys with me? You can have a Christian person who now says the opposite. Like so Mark, you can, if I'm not mistaken, you can have another Christian person that says, no, it's all about revelation and theology and faith, and reason is secondary. You know, so even within Christianity, you can have one person that will say it's like 2 wings. One is faith, and the other one is reason, and they go together. And they'll be following from this same kind of Athenagoras train of thought. You know, another person will say reason is secondary, revelation and theology is first and foremost. And you can have 2 priests, and the 2 priests will tell you different things. Like one will follow this school, one will follow that other school. And this guy, which did I mention his year? Around 180 AD. So yeah, around 177 AD, the supplication for the Christians is addressed to the emperor, and they accuse the Christians of being atheists, being cannibals, again, because of the Eucharist, saying that they're eating a human, and being sexually immoral. In defending the Christians are not atheists, he discussed the attributes of God, the divine revelations from prophets, the Son of God is the mind of God, the Word, the Creator. So he talks about all about how we understand the Word of God. He says the Christian concept of God is pure, a fact that's demonstrated by their words and their actions. The supplication for the Christians, who of the pagan philosophers have so burdened their souls, as instead of hating their enemies, love them, and instead of speaking ill of those who have reviled them, to bless them, and to pray for those who plot against their lives. In defending that Christians aren't cannibals, he says that Christians don't kill, and they don't watch for sport as the pagans do. So the pagans are accusing the Christians of being cannibals, and he's like, we don't kill. And he's like, we're not the ones who go to a giant coliseum and watch people get eaten. So he's saying the Christians have more respect for human life than pagans do. You see how it's like, not only are we not, we're accusing of us of, but our conduct, we're even holier than like the general public of what you guys are. And defending against the accusation of sexual immorality, he said that the accusation was nothing but an outgrowth of hate. Christ's teaching doesn't even permit a sin against purity in thought. And the Christian ideals for marriage and virginity indicate how high their esteem for chastity is. On the resurrection of the dead, it shows the high regard of the ancient Christians towards the human body. That's why now we're against cremation. He used examples from nature and reason, not from the creed. He shows that the resurrection is in harmony with God's characteristics, not against it. Man is created for eternity, and he consists of body and soul, both subject to moral order. Time check?
6:25.
25. Okay. For the sake of time, I think we'll conclude here, and you'll have these last few. So it's Theophilus of Antioch. Sorry. Melito of Sardis, and the Epistle to Diognetus. Hermias. Yeah. So those are the. So what we'll do is we'll conclude here. You can read those for yourselves on the PowerPoint, and then can someone pull up the syllabus? The assigned reading for this week is which pages? Say it again.
81 to 108.
81 to 108.